Why CQ?
I have, like you perhaps, never fitted anywhere I've been. I was brought up in lots of different countries. English is my second language. You know, my son is about to marry somebody from Bangalore. And it's a very short wedding, it's only 3 days. It's a very small gathering, there's only 800 people coming. But it is actually quite interesting because I'm really struggling with my daughter-in-law. And you could say, is it because she's from India and therefore has brown skin, and I'm from Britain and I have white skin? I don't think that's the issue. Is it because I'm half her age? No, I don't think that's the issue. Is it because she's a lawyer and I'm an entrepreneur? Yes, that's it. And she has sorted these 3 days out to 10-minute intervals. Yes? And on the whole, my view is it'll all sort itself out. Yes? So the real cultural issue here has got nothing to do with the colour of my skin. It is to do with incredibly different cultures that we both come from. And she told me the other day that she thought that perhaps she was the mother-in-law and I was the young girl getting married. But given that I was rather lackadaisical about the wedding compared to her. But cultural intelligence interests me because actually I think that the heart of the answer, as opposed to my rude one, which you must forgive me for, is that I was brought up in many cities, but they were all cities where there was no majority. And I think that makes you a different human being. So you don't seek the majority, you don't see the labels, and I therefore have often not fitted in places where that's not the case. And I think that those kind of cities are the future.
So cultural intelligence is about not making assumptions.
It's about lots of things, and that's one of them.
So how do you define cultural intelligence? Because I say, Julia Middleton is a global expert on CQ, and people say, what's that?
So, cultural intelligence to me is, and I'm conscious that there are people here who are tremendously academic, and I am absolutely not. But it seems to me if you wander around, you meet people who have this extraordinary ability to go from one cultural situation to another and thrive. And whatever is going on there, that's what cultural intelligence is. So to me, it is the ability to operate in different cultures and not just to operate, but actually to thrive, to love it, to make that a natural state, which is, I think, what the world needs. So cultural intelligence, the ability to operate in multiple cultures. And for me, multiple cultures is geographies, generations, sectors, specialisms, backgrounds and beliefs. It's the whole lot. So I love to take the mickey out. You know, when you do leadership things, very often someone uses that extraordinary word when they describe young people. Yeah, they use the H word. They use that expression. We've got to harness young people. And I always try to stop them and say, do you know what a harness looks like? It's a really big, thick piece of leather that you strap around an animal's head to make it do what it doesn't want to do, or to stop it from doing something it does want to do. And the last thing on earth you must do is harness talent. You've got to let it go, young talent. And I think generational cultural intelligence is as much a struggle as anything else in large parts of the world. It's quite as tricky as men, women, tall, short, it's, you know, all these different cultural differences. And I deeply believe that one of the competencies of senior leaders is, can you inspire young people? And if you can't, you frankly should get out of the way and leave it to somebody who can.
So after 28 years of pioneering this field, what are the 3 key things you've learnt about cultural intelligence?
Never to ask a question like that, it's very difficult. Well, first one is that there's no end to it, yes? So the person who says, I'm now culturally intelligent, has clearly lost the plot, yeah? So it's a constant journey. It's a constant journey of making a complete and utter idiot of yourself, and then having to ask for a great deal of forgiveness. And you only get the forgiveness if you've been brave enough to keep on the journey so people trust you and they'll give you it. I think that's one thing I've learned. And another one which I care about very passionately is that while I was writing that book, you know, somebody very kindly asked me to sign that book. I'm dyslexic. Yeah, I don't write books. While I was in the middle of writing that book, I got this wonderful email from a friend of mine, and I don't know if it's the same thing in New Zealand, but you can be a maxi bishop or a mini bishop in Britain, yes? So I got this email from John saying he was applying to be a maxi bishop, and would I give him a reference? So I sent him an email back saying, John, if you'd asked me 20 years ago if I would ever, dyslexic, be writing a book, I would have laughed at you. And if you'd ever asked me if I would ever be giving a reference for a bishop, I don't think I would have believed that. And he wrote me a great email back. He said, rest assured, Julia, there are 4 referees and the other 3 believe in God. I can't remember, but that whole sense of, so one, it's not a, it's an eternal journey. 2, that when I was writing the book, I began to realise that everybody assumed that cultural intelligence came if I could persuade you to reveal your culture to me, and I would then become more culturally intelligent, yeah? And then you, and you, and you, and you, and you. And of course, a lot of cultural intelligence comes from that. But the most tricky culture that you've really got to crack is your own, and that's really, really difficult. You know, where does your own culture get in the way, give you blind spots? Your own culture is the most difficult one. And for those of us who've occasionally been the butt of isms over our lives, and somehow think that we're the living expert on isms, you know, we're as horrible as anybody else. So trying to figure out and understand your own culture, I think, is the most difficult thing of all. And I think that's probably, those are the 2 really, really big ones for me.
So when you work with organisations around the world,
Yeah.
what do you see in terms of cultural intelligence? You get invited all around the world, common purposes everywhere. You set up this organisation 28 years ago, you travel all the time. You are in boardrooms, you are advising CEOs. I've seen a lot of what you do, Julia. You are there with the heavy hitters. And tell me, what is it that they are saying to you about cultural intelligence and cultural competence?
As ever, it's half empty and half full. It's, you know, people like you and I who don't fit now have an edge, whereas before we used to be people who didn't fit. Yeah? And I think that's quite interesting. Well, actually, I was with an organisation in the US the other day, and they had spent squillions of pounds, and forgive me for being rude, but on this project called Unconscious Bias, right? I was with the senior management team of this company in Atlanta. He'd spent squillions on this. And the guys turned to me and he said to me, we've discovered we've got biases. Very significant. You sort of thought, so, you want a cookie? I mean, you know, this is not exactly the most dramatic piece of information, is it? No, we definitely have bias. And then you say, so what are you going to do about it? No, that is the question, you said. I think it's just very interesting. You're seeing the world's becoming much more diverse. There's a younger generation who expect that. My generation, a significant, I'm 57, my generation, a significant proportion of the people in my generation were brought up in a world that did have majorities. And that's really, really hard to adapt, and to adapt fast enough. So, to be honest, I have lots of sympathy for people who are trying to adapt to an extremely unfamiliar world that's very weirdly new. But I think that's all over the world. If I'm really rude, you know, we run programs in all across Asia Pacific, and late one night, yes, if you sit down with people who are in India who go on our programs and you say, what's your biggest management challenge? They often say, oh, managing these New Zealanders and Australians in my team who think they should be running the show. You know, the world has turned upside down. It's mixed up, and it's produced lots of people who are struggling to figure out what the impact is and how they personally have to change. And it's quite hard, because you've been in your career, if you're 57, you've been in your career for how many 150 years, whatever it is. You sort of expect, you know, by the time you get to 57, you should be deeply respectful of you, and then you're saying, actually, you've got to turn everything upside down again. And I think people are struggling to do that with senior leaders. So I see a mixed, it's on the agenda, but I see a mixed response. But I also see a wave coming that people are unprepared for.
So talk to me about that wave. You're an entrepreneur. You saw this 28 years ago, when really we're just waking up to it now. You're sitting now in the world's fourth most super diverse city, and most people have just recognised that we are super diverse. They're still thinking it's sometime in the future. I'm trying to convince them it's actually already here. The stats clearly support the fact that it's already here. So when you talk about the wave that's coming, what is it, Julia, that's coming, and how fast is it coming?
Take a step back. The world in a few years' time will be completely, as we know, run by cities. 75% of the world's population will be in cities, and most of the talent will be convening in cities. And I think that that will be a huge mixture of different parts of the world and different cultures. And I would argue Auckland is ahead on that. If you can recognise what you're ahead on and use it cleverly. So to me, Auckland is a city that is the reason I'm here. Apart from being delighted to come to a city that May comes from. May is an interesting person. I mean, she's a pain in the arse too, but she's also totally and utterly and totally wonderful. All of us are pains in the arse too, aren't we? Because we want to produce change, and we're incredibly intolerant, and we want everything to go incredibly fast. So we're impossible to live with, but we are the people who are going to push the change. So I wanted to come to the city that Mai came from. So one of the biggest reasons I'm here is because of you. You're back. I didn't love you much about 12 hours ago. Club class or no club class. And I also wanted to be in Auckland because it seemed to me that you're ahead of the game. The interesting thing is whether you know you're ahead of the game and how you can use that cleverly in the future, both for the benefit of Auckland and New Zealand, but also for the benefit of the cities that will run the world. So you interest me as a city enormously. You are super diverse, and you've been through lots of learning, and processing that learning and producing the kinds of leaders who are going to take you to the next stage seems to me to be very interesting. That's why I'm here.
So what's coming is more of this?
Yeah. Do you know this is completely off beam, but it just interested me. Years ago, I was doing some work with the Bank of China. Yeah? And they had this fascinating stat, and I sort of leant across the table and kept on looking at it. And it said that if you were a mainland Chinese student, right, who came to study in London, within 1 year of studying in London, your English language skills had gone down by a factor of 20%. And why? Because students are crossing the world to do, in theory, study abroad. I would argue it's not study abroad at all, it's swap a campus. Yeah? So you land in a new city, a city that oozes cultural intelligence from every, do you call them pavements or street walks here? Pavements, every pavement, every trottoir is full of cultural intelligence. So you stay like an army of occupation within your university. And you find other people like you. New Zealanders do it, Brits do it, everybody does it. It's extraordinary. So you have this new generation of talent crossing the world to then convene in extraordinary cities like Auckland and not getting the cultural intelligence that that city can give them. And I became really passionate. There are 4 million students in the world who study to travel to study, yeah? And we did a piece of work that said they will convene on about 50 cities across the world. Most of them, not all of them, most of them. And Auckland obviously was one of them. And each of those places, we then run programs where you have to have 100 students, but there have to be 35 nationalities amongst them. And we run a program with them. But this whole sense of cities recognizing that they are convening places of the world and making that work for the next generation seems to me to be a huge opportunity. We've got to produce more leaders who can connect up the world.
Do you think leaders now truly believe, Julia, that they need cultural competence to continue to succeed? Or do you think that they should say that, but deep down they think that they can just continue as they are and still succeed? Because the world is a changing world.
I think people know it, but they don't know how to do it. And I think we have to give people simple ways. My father used to talk about the word vocabulary. You need a vocabulary for things. You need to have some ways so that people can have the kinds of courageous conversations that increase their cultural intelligence. So I think that there is a hunger for it, but I think a bit like the guys in Atlanta, there's a hunger for it, but not quite an understanding of what that involves and how to do it.
Excellent. Which is why you're here.
Which is why
you're here. So if like attracts alike, then how do you develop CQ? Because as I found out in London, developing CQ is really hard. It's really uncomfortable. Sometimes it's confrontational. I did really well with the people from Europe, from Australia, from America, from Britain. I found Asia, I did pretty well. I didn't do so well with the Africans, Julia. It was hard, really hard talking to people. I couldn't tell them apart. They all looked black to me. And I didn't, they were from third world countries. I found that very, very difficult. So how do you encourage people who have been used all their lives to having high IQ and high EQ, which is how they got to where they got to stay in a room and learn CQ when it's uncomfortable and hard and they may not be the best in the room?
Shall I talk about cultural intelligence then? Is that what you're asking me to do? Yeah?
Yeah. And then I want you to loop back and talk about the fact that you think we're ahead of the game and why you think we're ahead of the game and how we use the advantage.
Okay, so let's come back a step which is CQ, which is, to me, it's a sort of continuous line from IQ. Actually, if I stand up, I can see you at the back better, because you're rather dark back there. You may be looking grumpy and bad-tempered. I'd quite like to see what you look like. No. Right. So to me, well, do you remember when you were young and everybody tried to persuade you that IQ was the solution to everything, if you just be clever enough, and it's hugely satisfying because there's a score? Yeah? Do you remember? Do you remember when you had small children, you know, sort of 6 months old, and people used to come around and you used to explain that this was the child with the highest IQ the world had ever seen, based on no information whatsoever. But IQ was what we were all aiming for. And if I had a penny for all the people, or leaders to be honest, who say, if you could just take the people out of this issue, there wouldn't be a problem. And you sort of go, what a jerk. IQ is incredibly important because it means that you can take in complex information, process it rapidly. It's incredibly important, but it is only a starting point. You then got EQ, emotional intelligence, which was, let's face it, quite a significant move in the right direction. The concept that people might be relevant to leadership. You still get this ridiculous concept that it's the soft skills. I can't think of anything less soft than people, but never mind. So EQ came along. Suddenly, people like me, and I don't know how you feel, but as a woman, I found it deeply irritating. The amount of times you used to be on a panel with 5 people. You know, they were always, forgive me, but always men. And then it would sort of work in your direction, and you'd come last, and then the chair would say, well, what does it feel like from a sort of woman's EQ position? You know, as if, and I've always objected to it on the basis of the human rights of my sons to have emotional intelligence and not be accused of being women. Yeah? So EQ, to me, was a huge improvement, but it produces leaders who say, I'm good with people. Now, the trouble is that they forget to add the 2 extra words that need to go at the end of it, which is, I'm good with people who are like me. And the really interesting thing is, are you any good with people who are not like you? So to me, CQ was a natural step on with it. Can I work with people who aren't like me? I deeply believe that most organisations will continue to recruit, maybe for IQ, because they lack imagination and because it's nicely scoreable. Yes? I think many organisations will continue, as they do at the moment, to get rid of people for a total lack of EQ. But I believe deeply that in the future we're going to be promoting people for cultural intelligence. The ability to cross boundaries and to thrive in so doing. But it's not just the future leaders who need it, it's you and I too. Because the truth is that most problems that leaders face, that are really the reasons why you became leaders, are complex, messy, squelching problems. They squelch across boundaries, yeah? You can't solve problems with marketing people alone, or sales people alone, or production people alone, or the public sector, or the private sector on their own, or the north or the south, or men or women. Most problems require the ability, they squelch across the boundaries. But most of our leaders learn to lead within their own space, yeah? Where you have the pips. Well, you've got a business card that says, that's me, you see? In that space, that's me, I lead. Or you have the pips, yeah, on your shoulders that show that you're the authority here. Or you have the stilettos on your feet, yes, that show I am the leader. And most leaders, to my mind, are taught to operate on their own space. And in fact, most languages have something perfectly horrible to say, to describe people who cross boundaries, yeah, and interfere. I was brought up French, mêle-toi de tes oignons. look after your own onions. All languages have something horrible to say about people who interfere in other people's business. But the truth is, we need leaders who will cross the boundaries. So I believe that we will be promoted for cultural intelligence, but we need it ourselves too. One, because we want to deal with the problems that squash across boundaries. Two, because if you spend your life with people who are like you, I think you are doomed to be short on innovative ideas. There is nothing more boring than being with people who've started nodding agreement with you before you've even finished your sentence. Yeah? Homogeneity does not produce the brilliant ideas. And let's face it, we need brilliant ideas. Yes? Because most parts of the world need innovation, either because you have to achieve more with less, or because you have to achieve more for more people. You need new ideas. They come from difference. They come from many cultures clashing and fighting. And I believe deeply that innovation comes from what I would call well-led discord. And we need that discord. We need leaders who can cope with that discord and not go into a complete flat panic whenever it happens. And the last reason I would put is because we have to be able to inspire the next generation. They expect it of us, that we are more able to cross cultures. So we need cultural intelligence, because if we don't have it, we will become the thing that my father used to talk about towards the end of his life, when we used to have all these arguments about the future of the world. And he used to say that as the world became smaller, which it does, we know it does, the internet, World Bank, all the things that connect up the world, the flights, he used to say as it becomes smaller, it will fail to deliver on the promise that it becomes more coherent. Yeah? And he used to say that the reason was because the world would continue to be run by the flying dead. Yeah? And the flying dead are people like me, right, who arrived at 7 o'clock this morning, swoop in, they fly around the world, they sort of land and then take off, and have not a clue what's happening in different cultures. And the flying dead, sometimes they fly around the world, but sometimes they fly around their own cities. Yeah? And drive through their cities. With a limited understanding of the different cultures that live within those cities. And I think that the younger generation doesn't want to be the flying dead. Though too many of them still are. So, as I say, and as Mai says, and if you had a moment to put up that slide, it would be incredibly kind. So I started wandering around the world, I can't remember, about 2 or 3 years ago, to go and see all the people who I thought had this extraordinary ability to cross cultures. And ended up coming up with this model that is pathetically, hopelessly simplistic, okay? So can I just say that up front? Like all models, it's hugely easily, completely demolished within seconds, yeah? Load of rubbish, really. But models quite often are useful as a base for a conversation. Any chance of that slide? Can you see it? No. There it is. Lovely. Oh, it's there. Right. Forgive me, this is not the solution to the entire world. It's just a way of thinking through things, okay? So, people, it seemed to me, who had cultural intelligence, and that little stick person there on the left, yeah, had figured out this triangle, which is their core and their flex. Their core was the stuff that if they stopped doing it, they would no longer be them. Yeah? If I stopped doing that, I would no longer be me. Everybody always says, I know exactly what you mean, we're talking about values. And the answer is, well, that's one of the long list. There's all kinds of things in this list. Everything from values to belief to all kinds of, and then right down to behaviours. What are the behaviours that if I stopped doing it, I would no longer be me? Where is my core? And then, where are the things on which I can flex? And this oversimplistic model, let me play with it for a minute, produced for me a lot of clarity on some of the people who can cross cultures. If your core is strong and solid, I believe that people trust you more. If your flex is flexible, people trust you more. Yeah? If you go down to the bottom there, look at that one on the right, okay? You've got a little person with a huge, huge, huge core and a tiny, tiny, tiny flex. Yeah? That's a bit of a compliment. Because that picture is my grandparents. Yeah? They had huge cores, tiny, 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 tiny flex. Because they lived in the northeast of England. Yeah? And they reckoned that everybody in their street was like them, and if they weren't, they jolly well should be. Yeah? And there was no need to adapt to anybody, because why should one? And there was absolutely nothing wrong with my grandparents, except that you shouldn't let them outside the front door. Yeah? And then the one on the left is that tiny, 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 tiny core, and that huge flex. That was my first boss. He was a salesman, and I used to sit there watching him thinking, is there anything this guy wouldn't do to get a sale? And you wouldn't have trusted him further than you could throw him. And I believe that cultural intelligence comes on the line between your core and your flex. And you should be moving your core and your flex all the way through your life with huge care. Huge, huge care. But in moving, it should happen. It should be going on all the time, because you're in different situations, understanding different cultures, re-evaluating your core and your flex. It's not just, you see, it's also behaviours, absolutely crucial. Everybody always goes to values. Let's come back to, but I got an email from somebody the other day. He said it's very helpful analysis. And I said, well, thank you. Tell me why. And he said, well, I've stopped spitting in the street. Yeah? And I said, explain. And he said, well, I've realised that it's in lots of people's core that they are so disgusted about people who spit in the street, they can never really get over it. And I've reckoned that I can still be me and not spit in the street. Does that make sense? It's incredibly oversimplistic, but has certainly helped me a lot. So, as an example, and it's an overused one, but I was doing some work in Jeddah, yeah, not in Riyadh, but in Jeddah. Jeddah is a port city. Port cities are always much more culturally intelligent, yeah? The whole world convenes in port cities. And so going to do this work in Jeddah, in a place called AFAT College, which was an amazing college in Jeddah. And I was told that if I was going to go, I had to cover myself. So I sort of went into a sort of major, should I do this, should I not? What should I do? How should I do it? And in the middle of going backwards and forwards, trying to figure out whether I was or was not going to cover myself, I got a group of my daughters, the middle 3-year-old daughters, right? They arrived one evening to give me a long lecture that I wasn't to let the side down, that I'd been a feminist all my life, and how dare I even half a minute consider the concept that I should cover myself, yeah? And in the end, I came to the conclusion that what I wear has never fussed me, yeah? What I wear is fundamentally in my flex, and I just do not care about it. So, if that was the truth, I would wear anything that caused me to be able to succeed, and therefore I covered myself. Fascinating first thing was to be in Jeddah and to discover a prejudice that I'd never really understood, and that was deep buried inside me that I didn't know, which is that I had always assumed that any woman who covers herself is a wimp, yeah? And who's letting the side down, and is pretty useless. And to be honest, in Jeddah, surrounded by extraordinary women who cover themselves, you just discover what an idiot you could be. Yeah? But the thing that was really interesting was coming back to the UK after the trip, and everybody would go, "Them, you see?" And he'd say, whenever anybody uses the expression "they," you know you're in trouble. Yeah? They! I say, "Well, what they?" And they say, "Well, they come to London. You go to Jeddah, and you're prepared to cover. And they come to London, and they refuse to wear Western clothes." And the answer is, hang on, what they wear is in their core. What I wear is in my flex. And to me, looking at it that way, it's a dumb question. And core and flex certainly has helped me have a lot of what I would call very difficult conversations with lots of people around the world, trying to understand it. The top right-hand corner is, have you ever seen a film called The Four Lions? The Reluctant Fundamentalist. There's a guy in it who's a very dear friend of mine, whose name completely escapes me, I've been up to Riz Ahmed. And I remember when I was writing the Cultural Intelligence book, he sent me this email and said, "Julia, do not add yourself to the long list of middle-aged, white, liberal women being as intolerant in their intolerance," or whatever it was. I got really lost. But he helped me drawing that picture on the top right. It's quite interesting because the cultural intelligence lies between the balance of the two. Yes? And I would argue that your core moves over life. Yeah? It's under constant review. Certainly my core was huge at the beginning, acquired entirely from my parents. It went, and Riz argues, you've got to get really down to a tiny amount in your teens, because that forces you to do all kinds of things that will actually get you to understand some issues. I think it creeps up and moves around a lot when you take your first international job, or maybe your first job that covers the whole of the city, like Auckland. And you've got to reevaluate which bits are you and which bits are not. I think it becomes enormous when you have teenage kids. Yeah? That's the really painful moment where you have to, when you make this extraordinary discovery that your kids don't have to have the same core as you. And most parents fail to pass that test. And actually, it's the realization that no one in the world will ever have the same core as you. But that doesn't make you a bad person. And then it starts creeping up again when you get to 57, and you become convinced that you know the answer to everything. And if everybody just saw it the way I see it, there wouldn't be a problem. You have to really work hard when you get to 57 to keep the core down, right? It keeps trying to creep up, and you've got to ram it back down again. And to me, cultural intelligence lies within this. Like some of you here, I run an NGO. And it's a weird thing when you run an NGO, isn't it? You often have strange access, but certainly for me, forever, I have always finished all my letters, "Love Julia." Finish all emails, "Love Julia." I write "Love Julia" to the chairman of swanky companies, to prime ministers, to the Emir of Qatar, to my butcher, to my husband's boss, who was deeply shocked and suggested to my husband that I didn't know who he was, and my husband said, no, she knows exactly who you are. She says that to everybody. But I write "Love Julia" to everybody, okay? And my colleagues often say to me, "Come on, Julia, stop it. You've got to recognise that Com Purpose has now got to a certain stage in its life where you've got to stop doing this, and it's got to become, you cannot write "Love Julia" to the Emir of Qatar." And then there are other people who say to me, the day you stop writing "Love Julia, you would have lost it. That is your core. And my view is that this issue is under review. I haven't decided yet. And in the meantime, it's "Love Julia." I think also that as you proceed, you get to that middle picture on your right, where you slowly begin to find the knots in your core. Yeah? The bits that, the behaviors or the values or whatever it is that are based on, not on judgment, but on prejudgment. That when they're out in the world and they don't stack up. Now, there may be people in the world who don't have any knots in their core. I personally don't believe they exist. They're probably just misguided. But I think we all have knots in our core. And I think you find them as you proceed in life. Sometimes you didn't even know you had them. And I think when you do, you find them, you have a choice. You either move them to your flex, because they don't stack up, or they are so deeply baked inside you for such a long time that you can't move them out of core. But at least you can make them your problem, not somebody else's. And the knots are tough. The knots are tough. I left France when I was very young. And I was brought up in many of those kinds of cities that I was describing earlier. And I remember moving to London, can't remember when, early 20s, and thinking, this is definitely a business advantage for me. I don't think I am as prejudiced as most people. I was thinking, this is cool, this is helpful. And then I went and did some work in North Kensington, which in North Kensington is the biggest Moroccan community outside Morocco. And suddenly, for the first time, a piece of me that came from France hundreds of years ago, that made me absolutely petrified with anybody who was from North Africa, came straight out. And instead of, in an unusual situation, making a step forward, I made a step back, totally unaware of it. Took a long time to understand it, and as a result of it, in my career, I have never not been on the board of an all-Arab company. So I always want to make sure it never comes creeping back in again. So I've always been on the board of things where everybody else is Arab and I'm the only Westerner. Because you do find knots in your core, and you've got to figure out what you're going to do with them. But coming back to it, point made earlier, absolute clarity, is that cultural intelligence, it helps a hell of a lot if other people talk to you and tell you things. And if you are a fierce enough listener that you can hear it all. And, of course, you sometimes meet leaders who want other people to reveal their cause, but won't reveal their own core. Yeah? So I don't think you can ask you to tell me about your culture unless I'm prepared to reveal something of my own. But the really tricky thing is understanding your own culture, to find all the knots in your core, and to carry on finding all the knots in your core, to move the line between core and flex, and keep it under constant review. And to discover your own culture, which I think is the most difficult one of all. And the prize for me is that we can develop enough cultural intelligence so that we can inspire young people, so that we can get many cultures together and lead innovation. And so that we can, some people go into leadership because they want to perpetuate what exists. Most of us go into leadership because we want to see change. There's nothing wrong with the first group, but those of us who want to see change, and with the complex problems, it requires you to cross the boundaries of culture. And I think you need the cultural intelligence to be able to do it. And to me, that's what leadership is about. So thank you.